Hi, it's Teacher Gagay again, and we are going to discuss the integument system. Now, the integument system is the largest organ of the body, or we call it generally as the skin. And as we discuss the skin, we had to start on the fish, amphibians, reptiles, aves, then last on the mammals, in which we belong to that group. Now, what are the function of the integumentary system? The integumentary system, or we call it the skin, performs a lot of functions. Number one, we have the support and protection, the primary function. This will help the organism to protect itself from the different stressors exerted by the environment. Ano yung mga stressors? Yung mechanical stress, physical stress, radiation, and even the chemical stress. You have seen some animals around or from the zoo na they have thick fur, thick skin, or even armored skin like what we have here in the diagram. We have the pangolin sa left, and in the right side naman we have the armadillo. Those animals have a thick armored skin just to protect themselves from predators. Next function, we have the reception or transduction of external stimuli, in which they could sense vibration, certain stimuli coming from the environment. One good example, mga snakes. Snakes could detect vibrations, incoming vibrations. So they could identify if the organism is large or the incoming organism is very small. Kung small, they have a smaller vibration. So yun. Material transport. Material transport such as excretion, resorption, dehydration, and rehydration. Thermoregulation. Thermoregulation is also an important function of the skin because this will help the animal to maintain its body temperature. So, it will not be affected easily with the external environment, unlike sa mga ectotherms. Ectotherms, these are animals or cold-blooded animals na as the environment changes in temperature, their body temperature also changes. But thermoregulation is also important to warm-blooded animals because this will help them maintain their temperature if the environment changes its temperature. Okay, next function, you have the gas exchange. Um, Gas exchange happens to all animals, but mostly this is a very crucial function to amphibians because their skin was also used for respiration. Nutrient storage is another function of the skin. Locomotion. Locomotion is also a function of some animals, especially sa mga birds. Birds use their feathers to fly. Some birds, not all birds could fly. Most birds that could fly use their feathers, and feathers derived from the integument system. And we have also mammals that could fly, like for example, mga bats. Bats, their wings were made up of skin. And mga lemurs, their fur was loosened, and they are designed for gliding. Another function for integument that it affects animal behavior. Animal behavior such as during mating system. Um, some animals, like mostly sa mga birds, use their feathers to attract female. And birds that are attracted usually are males. So males have attractive feathers and they use this to catch a female. And other animals naman like mga ibex o mountain goats to show dominance in the group. and also to attract females. Or by showing its aggression, they use their horns, and horns are derivative structure from integument. Sound production is also used, and excretion. So, skin releases waste. Sa atin naman, or in humans and some animals, the skin also secretes or sweat, at the same time oil, just to release the waste, and oil naman to moisten our skin surface. Pheromones produced in the skin. Some animals also use this for uh, mating behavior. At the same time, identification, parang ID. It will be used as an ID system. Like for example, we don't have this animal in the Philippines, the hyena. Hyenas, even though they belong to the same species, um, they have their small packs. And one way to identify themselves as a member of the pack, they have the same smell. And this smell was produced by their fur. So, those are some of the functions. Now, in the integument, it is a network of features that covers the organism. So, it delimits the organism. Parang our organs were protected from the external environment. So, that separates the organism from the environment. So, the skin functionally as a unit of three layers. First, we have the epidermis found on the surface. Supposed to be the arrangement should be epidermis, basement membrane complex, and dermis, because below the epidermis is the basement membrane, then beyond that is the dermis. But in some reference book, if we discuss on the layers of the skin, that is referring to epidermis, dermis, and hypodermis. Hypodermis is yung fat layer or the loosened layer made up of areolar tissue. So let's compare the 5 classes of vertebrates based on the integument. So the first group, we have the fishes. So fishes have several classes. We have there the Osteichthyes, Chondrichthyes, the Aglatans, Nastosomes. Later on, we have to discuss that one, how they are being grouped. So, fishes, with a few exceptions of the skin, fish don't have keratinized layer unlike in the mammals. So, and it is not covered with bony. Some are covered by the presence of the scale, and mostly they are covered with mucus. So unlike terrestrial animals, the epidermis of the fish is alive and active in the body surface. So the mucus layer forms from the individual cells in the epidermis with contributions from multicellular glands. So it is the skin of the fish have so many glands, mucus glands, unicellular glands, to secrete mucus, to protect the fish, cover the fish with mucus. That's why when you catch a fish, you hold the fish, that makes them slippery. So the mucus coat or cuticle resists penetration by infectious bacteria. So aside from being slippery in character, this will help the fish, covers the fish, in order some pathogenic bacteria could not enter immediately to the system. So it also makes fish slippery, that protects them against the predator. And it contains also chemical signals that makes them alarm for the incoming danger. So fish dermis often give rise to dermal bone and dermal scales. So fishes still have epidermis and dermis. So based on the histologic presentation in this diagram, epidermis don't have stratum corneum. So it has walang stratum corneum. Kaya siya flexible. So many unicellular glands like the goblet cells secretes mucus. You have here the unicellular glands. And below the epidermis, you have the basement membrane. This is the dermis. So made up of dense irregular connective tissue. And photopores in the deep sea fishes. So may mga photopores dyan. And here the chromatophore below the dermis area. Okay, next. We have here another diagram, a detailed drawing of the fish integument system. So we have here the curve 1. Ito yung curve 1. This will show you the development of the scale, which derive from the dermis. And as it arises, it also passed through the epidermis. So we have there sa dermis. So this is the dermis. There are two layers of dermis, stratum compactum and stratum spongiosum. Okay, so this is stratum spongiosum, stratum compactum, and the hypodermis are made up of loosened connective tissue. So the dermis is made up of fibroblasts and some other important cells. So the inner dermis contain blood vessels, nerve, sense organs, connective tissue. So the stratum laxum, or we call the spongiosum, made up of thin layer of loosened cells. While stratum compactum is quite thicker. So here, ito yung area. So this is a thicker layer. So that's the layer of stratum compactum. So the thickness of the integument depends on the thickness of the dermis. So scaleless, yung mga fish naman with no scales, such as catfish, yung mga water eels, or we call it catfish belonging to the genus Ictalurus, have relative thick leathery skin. So may mga adaptations. If the fishes don't have scales, they have a leathery skin. One example, yung ocean sunfish, or we call it the mola. The skin is reinforced by hard cartilage. This is a very large fish. So the skin itself was covered with a hard cartilage. So it has a thickness of 50 to 75 millimeter thick. So the snailfish naman, for example, Liparis from the family Liparidae, have jelly-like substance with a thickness of 25 millimeters of their dermis. See? So different sizes of fishes have different thickness of integument system. So let's proceed on the general structure of the integument system of some fishes. So the three epidermal layers coming from inward to outward. Okay, this is inward. Started from the basement membrane since we deal on the epidermis. So coming from the basement membrane, we have there the columnar cells. So the columnar cells called the stratum germinativum. Stratum germinativum is common to all vertebrate skin. We have also stratum germinativum. Sometimes it is called stratum basale. So stratum germinativum have only a single layer of cells. but it is highly active. Sometimes it is ovoid, some say it is a columnar cells, and it is situated on top of the basement membrane. So the basement membrane give nourishment to these cells. So this is one way the epidermis receive its nourishment. So through the basal membrane or the basement membrane. So that's it. Next, we have the stratum variable numbers of falciform cells or mga murag ito, mga polygonal cells. So, with rigid walls, tonofibrils, irregularly shaped, dense nuclei cells, they vary from cuboidal to squamous. So, as it goes to the surface, parang nag-change yung mga shape ng cells. So, from cuboidal to squamous as they approach to the outer cuticular. Like sa mammals, the cuboidal type of cell becomes flattened when it reaches to stratum corneum. And the cuticle, this one, the surface or the exposed part, the external layer of the cuticle is made up of glycocalyx, or mainly a mucopolysaccharide. So the layer would depend on the size of the fish. Sometimes it is at least has the thickness of 1 micrometer. Now, epidermis contains pigment cells. The integument contains pigment cells found in the dermis. So the dermis has the pigment cells. Pigment cells contain variety of pigments that gives certain characteristics to some fishes. So what are the examples of pigment cells? We have the carotenoids, the pterin, guanine, iridophores. So let's discuss on these pigment cells. Okay, let's have pterin. So pterin, you have here a cross-section of the tissue of the integument of Pangasius micronemus. So number 1. So this is symbol number 1. This is a large cells have a centrally located nucleus, a club cells, and number 2 is eosinophilic cytoplasm. So the arrowheads point to the superficial mucous cells, and the green one is the dermis. So ito yung mga alarm substances of some fishes. Next, we have the melanophores. More on the pigment also. Contains melanin. Absorbs the entire visible range of light. So this is the melanophore. One good example is Astronotus ocellatus. So melanophore, the color pigment should be ranges to brown to black. So brown to black coloration, which we have also this kind of pigment. Xanthophores contains rhodopterin and carotenoid granules and appear yellow to orange. So there are types of lipophores. So it contains carotenoids. So xanthophores is another example of lipophores. And kung yellow naman, orange, and red pigment, that is for xanthophores. But kung red talaga, erythrophores na yun. Correction. If it is red, it is erythrophores. Pag yellow or orange, xanthophores. So those are examples of lipophores. How about iridophores? Now, iridophores, this will help makes the fish shiny when stricken by light. So, para siyang reflective characteristics. So, the cell contains platelets of guanine or hypoxanthine called iridophores. So these cells reflect light rather than absorb it like what we have sa melanopore, absorb lang niya. So, it giving fish the shiny appearance. Next, so since we discussed the epidermis, dermis, they have also the hypodermis. So, the third layer of the integument system. So it lies between the stratum spongiosum of the dermis and the skeletal of the muscle elements. So primary consists of areolar connective tissue, which is true to mammals also, and usually most prominent along the flanks. So the head region, the hypodermis, is indistinguishable from the stratum spongiosum. It is a frequent site of development of inflammatory processes. So, aside sa structures derived from the dermis, they have also the fins. But there are two types of fins. Yung spine and at saka yung ray. Okay. This one is an example of the spiny fin. So, spiny fin, so made up of large folds of skin with special support, covered by stratified squamous epithelium, continuous with the epidermis of the body. So, the underlying dermis have reduced stratum compactum and increased hypodermis. Another one, we have the rayed fin or the soft segmented fins, because the spine of the fin in the first part is harder. Ito naman is quite soft. So, one good example, paired Lepidopteryca come from the dermal bone that develops from the same primordia as the scales. So, it has the same development with the scales. So, dermis. So, let's have the first group of fishes, the chondrichthyes. So, the chondrichthyes, these are fishes with cartilage, or we call it the cartilaginous fish. So, dermal bone is absent, but the surface denticles termed placoid scales persist. So, they have this kind of scales, yung placoid. And the scales that give the skin for shark and rays that have a rough or parang rough texture. So the dermis is composed of fibrous connective tissue, especially elastic collagen fibers, whose regular arrangement forms a fabric-like wrap in the dermis. So this gives the skin strength and prevents wrinkling during swimming. Because, diba, if we are highly exposed in hypertonic solution or like sa dagat or the seawater, our skin turns to wrinkle because it releases a lot of water from the cells. So our skin shrunk. So that is a protective mechanism to some fishes, that by having an elastic collagen that wraps all of their over all of their body, so that gives them their skin strength and prevents um, dehydration. So that prevents wrinkling during swimming. Next, placoid scales themselves form the dermis but project through the epidermis. So a cup of enamel forms, the tip then thin lies, so derived sa dermis part, and a pulp cavity resides within. It resembles with the development of the tooth. Chromatophores occur in the lower part of the epidermis and upper part of dermis. So these are the fishes belonging to class Chondrichthyes. So the cartilaginous fish, we have the hammerhead shark, and they are also, based on the diagram, this is basically where they are located in the depths of the sea. So sa mga shallow areas, we have the short fin mako shark, bull shark, reef fishes, angel shark, and hammerhead sharks. Sa mga deep oceans, we have the basking shark, great white shark, whale shark, and deeper to that, we have the tiger shark, treasure shark, and the deepest part of it we have the mega mouth shark, and a small shark called the spin pygmy shark. So these are examples of cartilaginous fish. Aside from the sharks, we have also the rays, the manta, stingrays and manta. Now let's proceed to the class of Osteichthyes. So the epidermis includes basal layer of cells above which are stratified epidermal cells. So within these layer cells are secretory club cells that produces mucus or slime. So that will give them a slippery characteristics. One example, if you have hold a Nile fish, or we call it tilapia in the Philippines, Nile fish in Israel, some part of Middle East. That is the primary fish for the in Middle East. Nile or Saint Peter's fish. Uh, it is very slippery when you hold it. Especially, lalo na if you also hold a eel. Eel, even though they don't have scales, they are very slippery. So the body is covered with mucus. So the dermis of the bony fishes is subdivided into superficial layer of loose connective tissue and deeper layer of dense fibrous connective tissue. It also contains chromatophores or mga pigment cells. And the most important structural component of the dermis is the scale. So sa mga bony fishes, it is important that they are covered with scales. But there are also bony fishes don't have scales, but they have a leathery skin filled with mucous cells. Okay, we have here um, fighting fish. Based on their appearance, several types of scales are recognized among body of fishes. So, in bony fishes, we have several types of scales. So, the cosmoid scale seen in primitive fishes. We have also the ganoid scale. Kasi cosmoid is developed layer of dentine. So, it is beneath a thin layer of enamel. While the ganoid scale is distinguished by surface of thick enamel ganoin without underlying layer of dentine. So, here are the examples of scales. Placoid is only found sa mga chondrichthyes. Sa ganoid, so we have example the gar. If you have seen the gar, the head like an alligator with a body of fish. Cycloid, salmon. So one good example I think sa mga milkfish or bangus. Bass, stenoid. So these are examples of scales. And these are the examples of bony fishes or belonging to class Osteichthyes. So we have the mola or the sunfish. Ito tawag in the Philippines, it is called lapu-lapu. So we have here the seahorse or dragonfish, lionfish, and the eel, more eel. So